Imagine throwing a tomahawk on live television and it lands right between the cowboy's legs. The audience goes absolutely wild, and the host delivers a punchline so perfect that they had to edit down the laughter. Because it went on for too long, that actually happened, and it's just one of the incredible moments we're about to explore. You know, there's something magical about the way Johnny Carson could make an entire nation laugh with just a raised eyebrow or a perfectly timed pause. For 30 years, he was America's late-night companion, the voice that tucked millions into bed with a smile on their faces. Tonight, we're diving deep into those unforgettable moments that made Johnny Carson not just a television host, but an American institution. And hey, if you love classic comedy and want more stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on legendary moments from television history. Picture this. It's October 1965, and a young, ambitious talk show host is about to do something that would become legendary. Johnny Carson is sitting across from Ed Ames, a member of the singing group the Ames Brothers, who is also playing Mingo on the Daniel Boone television series. Ed is demonstrating his tomahawk throwing skills, a talent he picked up for his role as a Native American. Johnny, ever the showman, sets up a wooden panel with a cowboy silhouette drawn on it. Ed takes his position, winds up, and throws the tomahawk. The axe flies through the air and lands with a thud right between the cowboy's legs. The audience erupts in laughter. Johnny looks at the target, looks at Ed, looks at the audience, and then delivers the line that would be replayed thousands of times. "I didn't even know you were Jewish." The laughter continued for so long that they had to edit it down for broadcast. That single moment became one of the most replayed clips in Tonight Show history, and it perfectly captures Johnny's genius for finding comedy in unexpected moments. But let me take you back even further to understand why Johnny Carson became the king of late night. When he took over The Tonight Show in 1962, television was still finding its voice. There had been other hosts, sure, but Johnny brought something different. He brought Middle America to late night. He was from Nebraska, spoke with a slight Midwestern accent, and had this everyman quality that made viewers feel like they were chatting with a friend, not watching a distant celebrity. He could wear a tuxedo and interview Hollywood's biggest stars, then turn around and do a silly sketch where he played a fortune teller named Carnac the Magnificent, and both felt equally authentic. Speaking of Carnac, let's talk about that character for a moment because it represents everything brilliant about Johnny's comedy. The premise was simple. Carnac, a mystical seer wearing an elaborate turban and cape, could divine answers to questions sealed in envelopes that were kept in a hermetically sealed mayonnaise jar on Funk and Wagnall's porch since noon today. The comedy came from the absurdity and Johnny's commitment to the character. He'd hold the envelope to his forehead, announce an answer, then open the envelope to reveal the question. One classic exchange went like this. Carnac held the envelope and said, "Sis Boomba." He opened it and read, "Describe the sound made when a sheep explodes." The audience would howl, but Johnny would keep that deadpan expression, occasionally breaking character to curse at Ed McMahon when Ed laughed too hard. Those moments when Johnny would crack up at his own material were pure gold, because you could see him genuinely enjoying himself. Then there was the time Johnny invited animals onto the show. Now, animal segments could go smoothly, or they could go hilariously wrong, and with Johnny, the chaos was often better than any planned comedy. In 1982, Jim Fowler from Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom brought out a variety of animals, including a marmoset that decided Johnny's head was the perfect perch. The tiny monkey climbed up Johnny, sat on his head, and then proceeded to urinate. Johnny's reaction was priceless. He didn't get angry. He didn't storm off. He looked at the camera with that signature exasperated expression and said, "This is the first time this has ever happened to me." The audience knew that wasn't true. Animals had misbehaved on his show before, and they would again. But Johnny's willingness to be the butt of the joke made him beloved. One of my favorite aspects of Johnny's comedy was his monologue. Every weeknight, he'd come out from behind that famous curtain, do a little golf swing, and launch into topical jokes about the day's news. These weren't just jokes. They were a national temperature check. When Johnny made a joke about a politician and the audience laughed, that politician knew they'd entered the public consciousness. When a joke didn't land, Johnny had this perfect way of handling it. He'd look at the audience, maybe tug at his tie, and acknowledge the silence. Sometimes he'd say, "This is the kind of crowd that would watch hee-haw without laughing." Or he'd turn to Ed McMahon and make a comment about the writers. That ability to recover from a joke that didn't work became comedy in itself. Let's talk about Johnny's relationship with Ed McMahon because that dynamic was crucial to the show's success. Ed was more than just a sidekick. He was Johnny's perfect foil. Ed's booming laugh would set up Johnny's punchlines. When Johnny said something funny, Ed's ha-ha-ha would cue the audience. But Ed was also someone Johnny could play off of. One recurring bit involved Ed's supposed drinking, though in reality, Ed was quite professional. Johnny would make jokes about finding Ed in various states of inebriation, and Ed would play along perfectly. There was this genuine friendship between them that viewers could feel, and that warmth made the show feel like a gathering of friends rather than a television program. Now, we have to talk about Johnny's characters because he wasn't just an interviewer. He was a sketch comedian. Besides Carnac, there was Floyd or Turbo, an uneducated, opinionated American who would deliver editorials on various topics. Johnny would dress in a plaid hunting jacket and cap, sit at a desk, and deliver the most hilariously misguided opinions. Floyd would mispronounce words, misunderstand concepts, and represent a certain segment of America with affection rather than mockery. It was satirical, but it was never mean-spirited. That was Johnny's gift. He could poke fun without being cruel. Then there was Art Fern, the sleazy host of the Tea Time movie. Johnny would wear a cheap suit and a terrible toupee, advertising fictional movies with ridiculous plots. He'd leer at the camera while describing films that didn't exist, making double entendres that would sail right over the censors' heads. In one sketch, Art Fern is advertising A Fistful of Fingers, a western about a poker player, and the innuendos kept coming. Carol Wayne, who played the matinee lady, would stand beside him in revealing outfits, and their chemistry created comedy that was suggestive but never crossed the line into vulgarity. It was cheeky fun, and Johnny clearly enjoyed playing this ridiculous character. One moment that showcased Johnny's quick wit happened when he was interviewing a young Drew Barrymore. She was probably 7 or 8 years old, promoting one of her early films, and she was full of energy. She climbed all over the furniture, told rambling stories, and at one point, she got up and started dancing. Johnny, who could sometimes seem uncomfortable with overly precocious children, handled it perfectly. He let her be herself, gently guided the conversation when needed, and made her feel like the most important guest he'd ever had. When she finally sat down, Johnny said, "I think we should adopt you." And you could tell he meant it. That kindness, that ability to make every guest feel special, was part of his magic. But Johnny could also be a tough interviewer when the moment called for it. In 1973, during the height of Watergate, Senator Sam Ervin appeared on the show. This was unusual because The Tonight Show wasn't typically a place for serious political discussion. But Johnny asked thoughtful questions about the constitutional crisis facing the nation. He didn't grandstand or make it about himself. He let Senator Ervin explain the situation. The audience sat in rapt attention, not laughing, but engaged in a different way. That showed Johnny's range. He could make you laugh until your sides hurt, and then he could make you think. The practical jokes on The Tonight Show were legendary. Johnny loved to mess with his guests, especially the ones who were too self-serious. Charles Nelson Riley, the actor and frequent game show panelist, was a favorite target. Charles was flamboyant, theatrical, and always ready to play along. In one episode, Johnny arranged for a man in a gorilla suit to chase Charles around the stage. Charles screamed and ran, his arms flailing, clearly terrified, but also playing it up for the camera. When he finally realized it was a setup, he laughed so hard he could barely catch his breath. These weren't mean pranks. They were invitations to join in the fun, and most guests appreciated being part of the Tonight Show tradition. Let's not forget about Doc Severinsen and the NBC Orchestra. Doc, with his colorful suits and incredible trumpet playing, was another key component of the show's success. Johnny and Doc had a playful relationship. Johnny would make jokes about Doc's wardrobe choices, and Doc would fire back with musical stings that punctuated Johnny's jokes. When a joke bombed, Dov might play a sad trombone sound. When something unexpected happened, a quick trumpet flourish would underscore the moment. That interplay between host and bandleader added another layer to the comedy. There was one sketch that stands out as particularly brilliant in its simplicity. Johnny played a psychic surgeon, one of those fraudulent healers who claim to perform surgery with their bare hands. In the sketch, Johnny pretends to pull various objects from a patient's body, rubber chickens, alarm clocks, you name it. The absurdity escalated beautifully, and Johnny's commitment to the bit never wavered. He'd look at the camera with complete seriousness while pulling increasingly ridiculous items from the patient, and the juxtaposition between the serious tone and the silly content created perfect comedy. Joan Rivers was one of Johnny's most frequent guest hosts, and their relationship was complicated but fascinating. When Joan was starting out, Johnny gave her opportunities that other comedians only dreamed of. He let her fill in as host, which was a huge vote of confidence. Her comedy style was different from Johnny's, sharper, more aggressive, but she could command that stage. There's a famous moment where Joan is guest hosting, and she's interviewing Cher. The two women started comparing fashion choices and celebrity gossip, and it became this wonderfully catty conversation that Johnny never would have had. But that perfectly worked for Joan. Unfortunately, their relationship would later sour over business decisions, but in those early days, Johnny was her biggest champion. The physical comedy on The Tonight Show was often overlooked because Johnny was such a brilliant verbal comedian, but he had great timing for physical gags too. There was a recurring bit where something on the set would break, and Johnny would have to improvise. A curtain wouldn't close properly, or a desk drawer would stick, and instead of editing these moments out, they'd keep them in because Johnny's reaction was comedy gold. He'd struggle with the drawer, make a face at the camera, and suddenly the technical difficulty became the joke. One interview that I think demonstrates Johnny's skill as a conversationalist was his sit-down with Orson Welles. Now, Orson Welles was a legendary filmmaker known for being difficult, opinionated, and not suffering fools. But Johnny approached him with genuine respect and curiosity. They talked about Citizen Kane, about Welles' career, about the film industry, and Welles opened up in a way he rarely did. Johnny didn't try to be funny during this interview. He tried to be insightful, and the result was a fascinating conversation that viewers still talk about today. Then there were the anniversary shows, where Johnny would look back at memorable moments from previous episodes. These retrospectives were hilarious because they showed the evolution of comedy and culture. You'd see fashion change, hairstyles evolve, and topical jokes that made no sense years later. But Johnny's essential qualities remained constant. His timing, his warmth, his ability to find humor in any situation. The way Johnny handled his divorce from his second wife on air was remarkable. He didn't go into details, didn't trash her publicly, but he made a few self-deprecating jokes that acknowledged the situation without being bitter. He'd say something like, "I just learned that in California, 50% of all marriages end in divorce, and the other 50% end in death. Either way, you lose the house." The audience would laugh because they could tell he was processing his pain through humor, and that vulnerability made him more relatable. Let's talk about some of the wilder guests who appear on The Tonight Show. Tiny Tim, with his ukulele and falsetto voice, was definitely one of the most unusual. When Tiny Tim married Miss Vicky on The Tonight Show in 1969, it became one of the highest-rated episodes in the show's history. Over 40 million people tuned in to watch this bizarre ceremony. Johnny played the straight man throughout, treating the event with a kind of amused respect. He never mocked Tiny Tim for being different. Instead, he celebrated his uniqueness, and that acceptance was part of Johnny's appeal. Bob Hope was a frequent guest, and watching him and Johnny together was like watching the masters of comedy. From different eras finding common ground, Bob would tell his vaudeville-style jokes, and Johnny would react with perfect timing. They'd sometimes do bits together, and you could see the mutual respect they had for each other's craft. In one memorable appearance, Bob and Johnny traded jokes for nearly 15 minutes, barely letting the audience's laughter die down before launching into the next gag. The remote segments, where Johnny would leave the studio and do something unusual, were always entertaining. There was the time he visited a sumo wrestling training facility in Japan and ended up in a mawashi, the traditional sumo loincloth, trying to wrestle much larger opponents. Johnny's willingness to look ridiculous, to be physically uncomfortable for a laugh, endeared him to viewers. He wasn't too cool for anything. One of the most touching moments came during Johnny's final episodes. Robin Williams appeared and did a set that was part tribute, part comedy performance. Robin's manic energy was completely different from Johnny's controlled delivery, but Johnny watched with genuine delight. When Robin finished, Johnny stood and applauded, and you could see that he was proud of what he'd created, a platform where comedians could take risks and find their voice. Bette Midler's final performance on Johnny's last show was emotionally overwhelming. She sang one for My Baby and one more for the road directly to Johnny, who sat visibly moved. When she finished, she said, "I love you," and Johnny replied, "I love you too." It wasn't played for laughs. It was a genuine moment of affection between the entertainers who respected each other deeply. Johnny's pranks on Ed McMahon deserve their own discussion. There was the time Johnny arranged for Ed's chair to slowly sink during the show, so it kept getting lower and lower relative to the desk. Ed didn't realize what was happening at first, and when he finally caught on, his reaction was priceless. Johnny would also occasionally slip things into Ed's desk drawers: fake spiders, whoopee cushions, anything to get a reaction. Ed always played along because he understood that he was part of the comedy, not just a victim of it. The Mighty Carson Art Players sketches were another recurring feature where Johnny and his announcer, and sometimes other cast members, would act out absurd scenarios. They might parody popular TV shows or movies, always with terrible wigs, cheap costumes, and completely over-the-top performances. The shabbiness of the production values was part of the joke. Johnny wasn't trying to compete with Saturday Night Live's polished sketches. He was doing something deliberately amateurish, and that self-awareness made it funny. There was a running gag where Johnny would read news stories about people doing stupid things, and he'd react with disbelief. "Did you hear about the man in Florida who tried to rob a bank with a banana?" Johnny would pause, let that sink in. A banana. Another pause. The police arrested him, but then they had to let him go because the evidence went bad. The structure of these jokes was simple, but Johnny's delivery made them hilarious. Let me tell you about Johnny's relationship with his writers. He respected them immensely and would often credit them on air when a joke worked particularly well. But he also wasn't afraid to throw them under the bus when a joke bombed. "The writers are on vacation this week," he'd say after silence greeted one of his monologue jokes. "Actually, they've been on vacation for 6 months. I just didn't want to tell you." The self-deprecating humor took the sting out of the failed joke and turned it into a different kind of comedy. The celebrity impersonators who appeared on the show were always a treat, especially Rich Little, who could do dozens of voices. Johnny would set him up with the premise maybe Rich would do all the voices in a movie scene, and Rich would deliver flawlessly. Johnny's face while watching Rich perform showed genuine admiration. He appreciated talent, and he gave talented people a platform. One aspect of Johnny's comedy that's sometimes forgotten is his use of silence. He understood that pausing, letting a moment breathe, could be funnier than filling every second with words. After a particularly absurd statement from a guest, Johnny would just stare at the camera, saying nothing, and the audience would erupt. That reaction shot became iconic. You didn't need words to know exactly what Johnny was thinking. The anniversary shows where Johnny would bring back classic characters like Carnac were always special events. By the 1980s and 1990s, these characters had decades of history behind them, and watching Johnny slip back into them was like visiting old friends. He'd do Carnac, and the audience would anticipate every beat. When Ed would say, "May a camel leave a gift in your sock," and Johnny would respond with an elaborate curse, the familiarity made it even funnier. Near the end of his run, Johnny became more reflective on air. He'd sometimes talk about how lucky he'd been, how amazing the experience had been, but he never got maudlin. He'd make a sincere statement and then undercut it with a joke because that's who he was. Sentiment was fine, but not too much of it. What made Johnny Carson's comedy timeless was its foundation in human observation. He made fun of human behavior, not specific people. His jokes about relationships, about everyday frustrations, about the absurdities of modern life. These things remain relevant because people haven't changed fundamentally. We still have the same insecurities, the same confusion about technology, the same relationship problems that Johnny joked about in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and early 90s. As we reach the end of our journey through Johnny Carson's funniest moments, it's clear that what made him special wasn't just his ability to make people laugh. It was his consistency, his professionalism, his genuine love for the craft of comedy. He showed up 5 nights a week for 3 decades and made it look effortless. Behind that casual delivery was incredible skill, honed through years of practice. Johnny once said that television is like a girlfriend you can't quite trust. You know she's attractive and fun, but you're never sure if she's going to embarrass you in public. That kind of self-aware humor about his own medium showed wisdom. He understood that comedy is ephemeral, that what works one night might not work the next, but you keep trying anyway. The legacy of Johnny Carson lives on in every late-night host who followed him. David Letterman, Jay Leno, Conan O'Brien, Jimmy Fallon, Stephen Colbert, they all learned from Johnny. Some adopted his interview style, others his willingness to do physical comedy. But all of them understood that connecting with the audience, making people feel included in the joke, was the secret to success. When Johnny Carson stepped away from The Tonight Show in 1992, it felt like the end of an era because it was. Television was changing, becoming more fragmented, more cynical. But for 30 years, Johnny had been a constant presence, a reliable source of laughter and comfort. He made America laugh through wars, recessions, political scandals, and personal tragedies. He reminded us that no matter how bad things got, we could always find something to laugh about. There's something profound about rewatching these classic Johnny Carson moments today. In our current age of viral videos and bite-sized content, where attention spans have shrunk to seconds, Johnny's comedy reminds us of a different pace. He understood that comedy needs room to breathe, that the anticipation before a punchline is as important as the punchline itself. When he paused after reading a Carnac answer, letting the audience figure out the joke before he revealed the question, he was teaching us patience, showing us that delayed gratification in comedy is worth it. The beauty of Johnny's humor was its universality. He could make a sophisticated joke that intellectuals would appreciate and follow it immediately with physical comedy that made children laugh. When he'd get tangled in the curtain entering the stage, or when a prop would malfunction, these unscripted moments revealed something essential about his character. He wasn't precious about his image. He wasn't trying to maintain some untouchable celebrity persona. He was willing to look foolish, and that vulnerability created a bond with viewers. Remember the time Johnny invited a young magician onto the show, and the kid's tricks kept failing? Instead of cutting the segment or moving on quickly, Johnny leaned into it. He helped the boy try again, encouraged him, and turned what maybe that's the perfect encapsulation of Johnny Carson's appeal. He made success look easy while never forgetting how hard it actually was. He made comedy seem effortless while putting in tremendous preparation. He appeared relaxed while being intensely focused. These contradictions, held in perfect balance, created something magical that resonated with audiences for 3 decades and continues to resonate today. That's not just comedy. That's a gift to the nation, and we're all richer for having experienced it. Every laugh he generated, every smile he created, every moment of joy he brought into American homes, these are his legacy. And it's a legacy that reminds us of television's power to unite, to heal, and to simply make life a little bit better, one laugh at a time. If you enjoyed this journey through Johnny Carson's most hilarious moments, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell icon so you'll be the first to know when we post more incredible stories from the golden age of television. Share this with your friends who appreciate classic comedy, and let us know in the comments which Johnny Carson moment was your absolute favorite. Thanks for watching, and remember, keep laughing.